Hey, deserving listeners, the Ultimatum. Let's watch.
I don't feel like I've been very good ever in the history of all the relationships that I've ever been in showing that like I do have a romantic side. And I don't really know why that is.
Yeah.
I'll be completely honest, because like I want to make someone feel like I've considered them in everything. And, you know, being...
So that's really great. It's really interesting that he's saying that. He's, I think, recognizing, hey, I can be romantic with Kat right now. Why can't I be romantic with others? I think most notably Roxanne. What's going on here? And instead of having some defense against this internally, like, well, you know, women, they're so demanding, or women, they're so romantic, and men aren't romantic. These kind of defenses are what people will engage in to protect themselves from the inner conflict, or from having to think or confront the fact that there might be something about them that is problematic. It's important that we all recognize that, you know, 3 to 5% of our personality is abrasive, annoying, problematic, hostile, harmful to ourselves and others. You know, there's 3 to 5% of our personality that's bad. You know, now the vast majority of us are, you know, of our personalities are good. There's no way to quantify this, but yeah, I think it's an important way to think about it, and to be humble about that and to explore that. And it's really interesting the way he's saying. He's like, I don't know why I'm like this. It's a really great beginning to learning about yourself and change so that you can get your needs met and you can cultivate stronger relationships.
Yeah.
I'll be completely honest, because like I want to make someone feel like I've considered them in everything. And, you know, being the person who makes them feel like they're taken care of. I think I was just selfish.
Yeah.
Honestly. I think a big reason...
It's interesting the way Kat's listening. I mean, she's being a good listener, but it feels like maybe she's like, wow, he talks a lot, or something. I don't know. But at any rate, he says that he believes that he's selfish. Okay, maybe some self-centeredness is an issue that he is now trying to address, noticing about himself. He also said something interesting of, I can't remember the phrase, but he says, I want to be a better partner to someone else, and I don't normally do that. So I keep wondering what sort of hole he gets into in the routine of his life. Roxanne was referring to him playing video games all the time. I've been wondering, is it depression? Is it, I don't know, some kind of avoidance of life, some fear, something like that? You know, often what will be said about people like that is they're lazy or they're unambitious, like what Roxanne says about him. But not all the time, but usually people have an inner drive to live life and to give to others and to not play video games 24/7. But there's something getting in the way. Usually our approach is stop being lazy, stop playing video games, instead of trying to build people from the bottom up.
For me too is like, I've never been financially stable. And so like, it is really hard for me to think about what it is that I want to do for fun, because it's like, I can't afford to.
Right.
Like I can't spend hundreds of dollars on these tickets and dinner and drinks. And, you know, before I know it, I've spent.
Yeah, that's a common issue for people, especially if their partner is expecting more, and we could imagine that Roxanne would expect more. It's hard to know how that would play out, but you could imagine it. And it's so unfortunate in our times that someone like Antonio would say, I can't have fun with my partner. I can't have experiences. I can't have romantic expressions because I don't have enough money. I mean, it's the lies that we have internalized from Madison Avenue, from advertisers and marketers, that it costs money to be romantic, whether it's diamond rings that are overpriced for engagement rings or wedding rings, or all the things involved in weddings. In order to have, in order to express your love for each other, you have to spend at least $5,000 to $10,000 on flowers alone. This kind of thing. And each to their own, but it certainly wasn't this way 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. people were romantic and loving and giving and might not spend money on each other at all. They might just go to the park and make some food in a picnic basket and go, something simple like that, and connect. They might just laugh in bed together or something, right? So it's unfortunate. I don't know. I feel like there's a number of indications that something's going on with Antonio that is deeper than just him being lazy or selfish or something. He talks about how Alex, who's now with his partner Roxanne, how Alex is better than him, and he's worried about. So something's going on with Antonio, and I think it plagues him frequently, and I think that results in him being aggravating and distant to Roxanne.
Is always going to be able to take care of them. The person that they're with knows how to make them happy and comfortable, and like I don't feel like I've really been very good at doing that. When I'm not planning anything, it comes across as I don't care about you, but really it's like I can't afford this.
Yeah.
Like I cannot pay for this. I can't buy tickets. Like I don't go to concerts. Like I don't do anything.
And I wonder if someone could help him with this, where they give him options to do things and to suggest things to his partners that don't involve money. Things like picnics or going on a hike or a bike ride or playing a game together or, I don't know, going to a movie. I'm guessing he can afford going to a movie at least, but sometimes not. Sometimes they're expensive. But anyway, so I wonder if he has been really indoctrinated into a way of thinking, or even if he was given those opportunities, if he would still have some other barrier to it. I don't know.
Right.
And then that comes across as like, I don't give a shit, but I do. And I don't know, I think I hold a lot of that back with Roxanne. I just don't know why I had this like crippling, like never make a mistake ever, like whatever, like just don't even come close to it. So I just like operated in like this little square,
Wow, well, that's saying something about their dynamic. Let's rewind that. He says he feels terrified to make a mistake, so he stays in this little box. And this is a common issue, actually. And it's really interesting. He's just talking about it openly. Like, let's rewind.
I just don't know why I had this like crippling, like never make a mistake ever, like whatever, like just don't even come close to it. So I just like operated in like this little square, and like.
I will say, I wonder if Kat is really understanding what he's saying. I don't know, obviously, but the way she keeps nodding her head and saying yeah and responding, it kind of seems like she's not really, or she listens in a very different way than I listen, or I would want someone to listen to me. I don't know. Now, maybe she's bored out of her mind because he's been talking for 25 minutes. It kind of has that look to it. So, maybe we could let her off the hook in that way. I don't know. Maybe she is understanding or with him, vibing with him, but it kind of seems like she's not to some extent. I don't know, which is fine. So anyway, again, he was talking about how he has this crippling anxiety. He goes, I have this crippling, which is a visceral feeling, right? I would imagine that it manifests as a visceral fear that makes him shut down and maybe avoid by playing video games. So some kind of trauma about being lazy or being not a good partner or being a bad boy in his family, being a bad son, someone who barked at him a lot, someone who would criticize him a lot. I'm just going to take a guess and say that there was something. There's a difference between a parent who is hypercritical and a parent who is critical in a traumatizing way. Well, let me rephrase that. So when he says, I have this crippling, what that tells me is that physiologically, when he has a trigger, he has that reaction. And that is in the direction of PTSD or in the camp of PTSD. There are trauma reactivities that are not included in the DSM, so we don't have a common diagnosis for it. So I just call it general trauma reactivity. And I think that that's helpful to do because not everything fits. PTSD is a very specific trauma under the umbrella of trauma reactivities, PTSD is but one, and it's very specific, and it has a lot of elements to the syndrome. It's the longest description in the DSM, which is right here for me. It has usually the symptom list in the DSM will be like 1 or 2 pages. For PTSD, I think it's 3 or 4 pages. There's a lot of symptoms that are a part of PTSD. So you can be traumatized in that scary way from something that happened in your past, either by a car accident or a scary parent. And you will develop potentially some sort of trauma reactivity that will last you many years into the future, maybe forever, unless you get proper treatment. And that's what it'll feel like. It's like, this visceral feeling. It's one thing for, like, with criticism, if it's not scary and not barky and not sudden and threatening to you, then you will have low self-esteem. And when someone criticizes you, you might have shame, and that can be awful and just as debilitating and just as traumatizing. But that's a different experience of like, oh, I'm such a loser. That's different than like, oh my God, what's happening? That's what he describes, and that tells me that someone was scary and threatening to him when he didn't have the power to get himself to safety, which is usually when we're children, right? So that makes me sad for him. And then because he hasn't been treated sufficiently enough or hasn't been down the road far enough, when he's with Roxanne, who, and maybe there's some kind of dovetailing there with Roxanne and her issues, because she is very, very focused on career and on owning a business and whatnot. And, on one hand, it's a sexist thing for people, particularly men like myself, to look at an ambitious woman and say that she is too ambitious and cold, and that's not what I'm saying. But I have to consider that as a bias as I'm watching her. But there's certain things that she does that I just wonder, because it seems like she's running away from something, and she's really trying to establish something to herself very frequently about, I think she's trying to reassure herself, I'm successful. And I think that it, is a focus of hers. I don't know, maybe she's just really into her business, and that's fine. But there was something she said when she was with, let's see, who is she with? She's with Alex. And they were concluding after a few days of being together, and both of them were working online together in a bunch of meetings and whatnot. And they noticed, oh, there, she's in meetings, and he noticed, and she noticed, oh, he's in meetings. And to her, that was this wonderful thing that she had a partner, in relation to Antonio here. Roxanne's thinking, wow, instead of playing video games all day, he's in meetings all day. That is very attractive to me. I wish Antonio were like that. And yeah, fine. But there's also, I don't know, it's hard for me to know, but it seems like there's something going on there for her of like this, almost like it's the only focus of life is business. And, you could imagine people running from poverty or oppression or trying to prove yourself as a woman or something, or again, she's just really into business. And, if someone hung out with me, then they, depending on the day, might get a fair amount of me just brainstorming about YouTube and business and podcast stuff. And, I'd be like, oh, and maybe I should do a reaction video about this, but I don't know if they have the time for that. And, and there's this new AI thing that might be able to help the podcast. So, people would get an earful of me, and they might walk away going like, my God, does that guy think about anything else other than the podcast and YouTube channel? And maybe she's just in that direction. But anyway, we can imagine that Roxanne, given her intensity and maybe her tendency to criticize or something. It's hard to know what the dynamic was like. I mean, maybe she was very kind in saying, hey, it hurts my feelings when you're playing video games all the time. But we can imagine her also being sarcastic or critical without trying to interact. Now, maybe it's justified if he's playing video games all the time and he doesn't really, it sounds like, so this is what I want to get to, is that for people, there are many, many, many people who have some version of what he is talking about, where due to childhood difficulties, there is a fear under triggers of being evaluated wrong or saying the wrong thing, putting yourself out there. Maybe that's a way to put it, is that when you put yourself out there by saying something or doing something or reaching for something or asking for something, the general experience was that enough times would happen, maybe more times than not, that your hand would be slapped back or someone would bark at you, that it would be scary, right? It's one thing when you're a child, when you reach out and people aren't there for you or they just ignore you. It's another thing when enough times, and maybe it's just 1 out of 10 times where it happens. That's enough to train the physiology of a young child. That 1 out of every 10 times when you're reaching out, when you're expressing yourself, when you ask for something, when you have an emotion, or even just if you laugh at the television show, it depends on the circumstance, but if 1 out of 10 times you have a parent that just comes down on you hard, some of you might be able to relate to this. And what that does is the child learns to not put themselves out there, to not say things, to not act, to be invisible, to shrink into a hole because it's the safe place. That's what they learned. By the time they're 10, 13 years old, they're in their room all the time, maybe playing video games all the time because there's nothing else to do. And what this does is it locks in this behavior, and the person lacks the opportunity as they grow and develop to enact their agency, to learn that with other people, they won't be slapped back for saying something. But because they're so awkward, because they tend to have this schema of don't act, don't say, don't make yourself visible, just stay invisible, stay out of people's way. And, there's a lot of hurt, a lot of potential anger on the inside around this, a lot of needs that aren't being met. And, there's various different elements to this potentially. Not every, it's kind of a wide variety of presentations, but one of them is that for some of these individuals, they will feel like they're asking for something. In fact, Tom Sandoval of Vanderpump Rules might be in this or an overlapping category where, like with Tom Sandoval, he seemingly very much believed that he had communicated to Ariana that the relationship was not good for him and he wanted to break up. Now, he could have been just lying about that retrospectively, but I think it's possible, given his personality, given the way that he presents, that it is possible that he literally believed that he was actually saying things that no one from the outside would interpret that's what he was saying. Like with Tom Sandoval, he might have said to Ariana, his girlfriend, something like, so, I just don't really know where our relationship is going, okay? And to Ariana or someone even hearing that can mean a lot of different things, especially depending on the context in which you would say such a thing. But to him, he walks away and says, maybe even talking with his friends, Swartz or whatever, I told her that I wanted to break up. I told her that the relationship was bad and that things need to change, and or otherwise we just need to break up. I told her that. Even though that was not what was communicated, because for the individuals that had that trauma, they're so used to being invisible that when they do extend themselves, like barely, they feel like they're exposing everything about themselves. They say one sentence and it feels to them like they said an entire chapter to another person because they manage to get the courage to say just anything, right? And they have all these mechanisms of denial because they don't want to continue saying things because they're so terrified to say anything. And the fact that they said something was quite a feat for them. And so they have a lot of incentive to say, well, I've said enough, and so, moving on. And I said all that I should have said, what else could you say? Even though from the other side, you're like, you didn't say anything. You were not communicative about that. So I could go on and on about this, actually. There's a lot of things to say, and it's something that's not talked about a lot. On the internet, there's a lot of talk about the narcissist, and what they're talking about, I believe, is a psychopath or a sadistic psychopath, Machiavellian individual who actually wakes up in the morning and says, I am going to ruin other people's lives in various different ways, particularly romantic partners. And those people exist, but they're rare, as I always say. And I think that's, if you say, if you just took a poll of all the different psychological personality discussions that are happening on the internet, I would venture to say 75% of it is narcissism related, even though, well, it's related to the word narcissism, but not the concept. Anyway, but there's so many other types of personalities that we should be talking about. And the reason why we talk about the narcissist, the people who are attacking us, is because, so many of us have been hurt, and it feels as though the other person did it on purpose. I've talked about this before, but like we've done all these studies in psychology, not me, but as a field. And one of the experiments, I'm pretty sure this is one of them, that in a car, you're in your car and another car annoys you. They get into your lane and cut you off. And almost always, if that happens to you, you will assume the other person did it on purpose and they're a jerk face. But if you, like in a lab, we wouldn't put people in these dangerous situations, but we would ask them. So let's say that you're driving on the freeway and you change lanes and you didn't see a car and you almost hit them and they honk at you. Do you think you did that because you're a jerk face, or do you think you did that because of an understandable mistake? And for us, we will say, well, it was an understandable mistake. I was distracted, or sometimes people are in the exact spot, even though I do check my blind spot. That's what we'll say for ourselves. If someone else does it to us, then we'll say, well, of course, they were a jerk face. It's not an understandable mistake that they did. So we have a narcissistic bias. It's one of the usages of that term in my field. It's not narcissistic personality disorder, but we're self-centered. We see things from our point of view, and we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We don't give other people the benefit of the doubt on average. So my whole point with that is that when someone hurts us, we assume the other person did it because they're a jerk face and they meant to. But if we hurt someone's feelings in a breakup, like say we date someone for 6 months and at about 3 months, we're like, I don't think this is going to work. And we give it a little bit more time. And then at the end of that 3-month period, we just say, I just can't make this work. And we break up as nice as possible. And the other person thinks we're a narcissist because we hurt their feelings and that we did it on purpose, that we never liked them to begin with and we manipulated them the whole time. That's what they'll think about us. But we won't think that about us. We'll think that it was completely reasonable what we did. In fact, we were trying to take care of them. There's a lot of circumstances that can change this, of course, but that's the general rule. And so the reason why I did a tangent within a tangent is because of this tangent, that when we are talking about personalities, we tend to talk about this like jerk face that we believe all of our past partners that broke up with us are, instead of talking about all the other things that we should be talking about, which are much more mundane, like this. And also, in particular, and I'm not saying Antonio's like this, but he's making a strong case for it, that the reason why one of the words that I frequently will use with clients is that they will invisibilize themselves because they were made invisible or they were forced to be invisible by their families growing up. And this kind of personality problem is not super annoying overtly to other people. It can be very annoying. If you have a partner that invisibilizes themselves, it can be very hurtful and very annoying because if you're interacting with someone like that, and maybe Roxanne has felt this, I'm guessing she has, that it feels very distancing, it feels rejecting, because you reach out to the person and they don't say anything back. So you're left thinking, well, then you must not care. I mean, it's hard not to conclude that, again, because of that bias, right? But what's really happening is, if it's any kind of tension, if there's any kind of stakes involved, it could be minor kind of stakes, like in a relationship, you go to the invisibilized individual and say something like, I don't know, just asking for their opinion. What's your opinion about this movie? Or what's your opinion about this political thing? Or what's your opinion about this food? Do you think hamburgers or hot dogs are better? Literally, for the invisibilized person, that is a trigger trauma for them. I mean, it depends on the degree, but I've treated many people like this. And to answer that question is to express themselves. And because they have trauma about expressing themselves, they clam up. People will even say that their throat will physically close. It's not closing, but there are muscles involved that are saying, no, don't, and diaphragm of saying, do not express yourself, do not talk, because when you talked when you were growing up, something scary happened to you, very sudden. And it could have been 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 50 times, because for us and other animals, other organisms, when we learn that a major life-threatening event will happen, even if it's very rarely, it's like, say this is prehistoric times, and you go swimming in the ocean hundreds of times, but then one time a shark comes out and eats your friend right in front of you. Well, you're probably going, even though 1 out of 500 times you went into the ocean and something bad happened, from that point forward, you might not ever want to go back in the ocean again, even though in your mind you're thinking, well, it's unlikely that I or someone else is going to be eaten by a shark. But my body doesn't really know that. And so the same goes with experiences with parents and other people growing up, is if I express myself and most of the time things go well, but every once in a while a shark comes out and attacks me, metaphorically, then I'm not expressing myself because it's not worth it to me. That terror isn't worth it to me. And this is all subconscious for the most part, and it becomes physiological to the point where you can have someone that as they are trying to express themselves or take action or advocate for themselves to their partner, like Roxanne, or there's any indication of some displeasure in the other person, you go, it's that feeling, the same feeling you would have if someone said, let's go for a swim in the ocean a week later after your friend got eaten, or someone pushes you in the ocean. That's that feeling. And so that's what I hear, is something in that category is what he's saying. And it's good that he's aware of it. That's super.
I had a harder time being myself.
I feel like it's like when there's an imbalance in the relationship where like one person's like working really hard and the other person isn't, it's like, it's kind of tough on whoever isn't working.
Okay, she was listening. Because that's a really appropriate and summarizing. She can't summarize everything that he says, but that is the crux of the matter. So so she was listening and comprehending. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. We often talk about a work-life balance, right? But how often do we talk about a balance between time for others and time for ourselves? It's so easy to get caught up in thinking about what everyone else wants from us and never taking the time for ourselves. And of course, therapy can help you with that balance. I mean, just going to therapy is taking time for yourself, right? I've had many clients who will do this. They will come into my office, sit down on my couch, and let out a big sigh of relief because I think for the first time in a week, they're actually taking time to think about what they need. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's worth giving a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and suited to your schedule. And also, you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So, find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
start to
hard.
resent them. You know, like there's a time in my life that I was high for like 6 years.
Okay, lots of, certainly people can get high for 6 years and it's not related to anything. But given everything that we've heard, I would imagine that if I were to assess him, that we would collaboratively connect all these dots into one larger picture, that invisibilization, that terror, that trauma, that anxiety, and if you get high, it serves a lot of different purposes. One, it can, for many people, take the edge off, depending. For some people, it makes it worse. But for many people, it relaxes people. It also is a distancer, right? Because it's not uncommon to have an experience while you're high that you're just kind of in your own world, and the outside world seems far away and less threatening. Depending, marijuana is pretty different for different people, depending on the type and how much you take and when and stuff. I don't know what circumstances, but if people are taking it all the time, and I hear what he's saying, I would imagine it's a part of that effort to relax himself and to mitigate the trauma at the end of the day, to also subconsciously it's a well-known thing that if you're in a relationship and one person gets high and the other person doesn't, that it's not easy to relate, depending on how high the other person gets. Similar to alcohol. If one person is, fairly intoxicated, the other person's sober, again, depending, it's hard to relate to each other. And it can be annoying to the sober person because, at one, it's like, wow, you're having fun, or wow, you're acting kind of goofy, or wow, you're in a whole other different headspace and I'm not really in that headspace right now. So it can be an effective tool to give a barrier so that you won't get triggered anymore, and it'll give you an excuse just to play video games all day and be invisible, right? So I don't know, but he's saying it in the midst of all this other stuff, and I'm guessing it might have to do with that.
It's a long time.
And it was an absolute escape. I was just ignoring the truth. I was ignoring my shortcomings, and it was a dark place. And I was wondering about depression earlier on, and I'm going to take a guess and say that many of you are like this or have partners like this. This is a common phenomenon, maybe even more so now, given the loneliness that a lot of people go through, even if they live with someone, the amount of marijuana that's available, the amount of things that you can do at home to entertain yourself, including video games. There's so many video games that you can play these days that are fun and engaging and distracting and an escape. The fact that you don't ever have to leave home, everything can be delivered. I imagine that there are many of you, and something that we don't usually get to talk about on this show. So, I want to thank Antonio for giving us this opportunity. I don't know if this is him, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about it. And I would hope that through all the things that I've said thus far and today and other videos, that if you are like Antonio, there is a path forward to being happy. And it doesn't mean you have to put yourself out there, and that's one of the catch-22s of going to therapy, is because for someone like Antonio to go to therapy, he has to express himself and put himself out there. Now, I do wonder what it is about Kat, we could imagine, that makes Antonio feel safe. Maybe it's because it's the beginning of the relationship and there's not a lot at stake, or he feels encouraged because the cameras are there. Maybe he's a little drunk and high, who knows. But we can imagine, given Kat's demeanor, because to me, I don't know about to you, but Kat comes across, especially in relation to Roxanne, Kat comes across as very non-threatening and a very attentive listener, lots of eye contact, lots of encouragement with active listening. Doesn't chime in very much, doesn't make it about her. She, and maybe there's a little too much of that in one direction. Hopefully they have some balance at some point, because you can imagine that this could become a trend for them. But I wonder if that's what is bringing this out from. Also, when you put people in strange situations, it sort of dislodges them from their
normal headspace so that they can finally kind of look at things and maybe just being on the show and not being at home high and playing video games all the time. Anyway, but on the other side, if you have a partner like this, which I'm quite sure, law of averages, many of you do have a partner like Antonio, it's harder to know what to do, because how do you get them to watch this video so that they might be inspired to go to therapy? You know, it's I don't know. So it's a little bit harder, but what would I say? Well, there is a lot of helpfulness potentially, even if just you go to therapy, you know, and there's things you can work on for yourself, but also you can talk with a therapist that understands this phenomenon with the Antonios of the world. And there are things you can problem solve and do week in and week out to affect change. It's complicated, but, you know, because sometimes people will come to me and say, you know, my partner has all these problems. We're trying to make him go to therapy and they just won't go. And a suboptimal version of getting help and affecting change is for that person to come to therapy, the person that is concerned about their partner. They go to therapy. And I've had clients that do this. They come into therapy and they have a problem with their spouse, and I talk with them about how systemically they might be able to affect change. And there's thousands of things that we do, but and one of the major things is to scale back on the things that are continuing to trigger the other person, like criticism or whatever in this case. But one thing that could be talked about is sort of through the back door, helping the Antonios of the world with their anxiety and with that trauma. You know, if I were to hear a lot from the spouse, I might be able to go, oh, it's maybe your partner has this problem, hard to know because I'm not assessing him, but, you know, maybe if you did this. And some of you might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound like a very good use of therapy. It might even be unethical that I'm working with one person, but I'm really trying to change their partner. And yeah, there are major, it's not unethical, but there are major considerations that I have to consider as we go through it, because I literally don't even know if that person exists. You know, this person could be delusional and not even have a partner and just be making it up, or obviously they could be distorting a lot about their partner. So, but, you know, in lieu of them coming to therapy themselves, it's something, right? At the very least, the person can vent to me about what they're going through, and that can be helpful to do with a professional. But anyway, like I might sort of coach or provide some suggestions on how to build a pattern with my client as they're talking to the partner, that like if they had a wish, you know, instead of going, how come you're always playing video games all the time? I would help my client to identify what's really happening for them is that they miss their partner, and they love their partner, and they are lonely. They want contact. And so how do you communicate that without being critical, without triggering your partner so that they go, and then they play video games to get high, you know? And you come at them and you say, hey, or you sit down with them and play video games with them, even though you don't really want to, but it's a step in the direction of like, oh, okay, I'm coming, you know, you're coming into my shell now, and okay, let's play video games together, and I'm acclimating to feeling safe with you while you're here. There's no criticism happening. I can kind of relax a little bit, maybe start to express myself, maybe be open to date night or something. You know, there's a lot of things that we can do is the point. But I want to acknowledge that there might be many of you who are really struggling with this, and I've literally never talked about it in one of these YouTube videos because it just hasn't come up, I don't think. I feel like I've never talked about this before in a video, maybe even on the podcast ever, which is kind of weird to think about. Well, no, I feel like I've talked about Invisibilized, but it just illuminates how many different conditions, trauma conditions, personality conditions that are available to us humans, and only a set of them end up being presented to us in reality TV for us to comment on, you know? And it's unfortunate because it'd be nice if there were more of a broader range that would help me to get provoked to say things so that y'all could go like, oh, yeah, and learn more about all the things instead of just the people with narcissism and borderline and just the abusive people, because that seems to come up a lot.
Just ignoring the truth. I was ignoring my shortcomings. And it was a dark place. And I was having sex and like just doing everything to just feel good.
Yeah.
Just like quick hit. This feels good. This feels good. I just have to do this. Oh, it feels good.
Okay. It's good that he's aware of that. However, I'm a little worried that because a lot of young men today are being indoctrinated into the pseudoscience regarding dopamine and around dopamine addiction or dopamine burnout, this kind of thing. The phrasing he's using is in that camp. He's using phrase, I don't know that, but, and even if he was, I don't know if it would harm him. There are benefits to, so do I go into this? I'll just say this, that there's a lot of claims and scientific-y sounding phrases and ideas within that rhetoric, and it's particularly within the manosphere. Well, not the manosphere necessarily. I mean, it probably is, but within male conversations going on online. That because if you don't know, there's a lot of depressed and demoralized and anxious people, some of whom happen to identify as men. And because of the loneliness and the pandemic didn't help, they're just at home playing video games all day and watching porn and masturbating and hating their lives and eating too much food and not exercising and not getting any work done. They'll be drinking, they're smoking weed, they're eating unhealthy food for themselves, they're playing video games, they're watching really fantastic videos, they're like I said, they're masturbating and they're watching intense porn, more, it just gets more and more. And barring any kind of addiction or progression to the problem, these people are occasionally they have moments of clarity where they just think like, where is my life going? And this isn't good. I'm just looking every 5 minutes for the next dopamine hit is kind of the way that they see it. And what is often, because we live in a sexist, paternalistic society that affects everyone regardless of gender, including men, there are all these ideas that have been just brainwashed and pumped into our head, one of which is that the solution to any kind of problem along these lines, particularly if you're a man, is through isolation, lack of emotion, willpower, control, stoicism, various different things. When you watch anime, which a lot of these people will watch, because in Japan it's even worse along these lines, that the most respectable person is always the stoic who says nothing, but is very good at what they do, like with the sword or the whatever. And so they occasionally have freakouts where they become very competent and rageful and get all these things done. And then, it's a trope in anime. If you watch anime, you know what I'm talking about. And it's, fine in a story, but when you've had this and, beaten into your head since you were young, that the Clint Eastwood and the John Waynes and the man who stands up and walks into the sunset by himself. He doesn't need anybody and he's competent and he only says things when it really matters, and often he says nothing, and it's just so respectable, because people who talk all the time, that's associated with women and gay people, and that's gross, and I want to be the stand-up man who walks with courage, and I'm alpha. It's all this. I'm mixing up a lot of things, but it's so my point is that when you have this problem of loneliness and staying home and feeling demoralized, playing video games, watching porn, masturbating, and that's all you're doing, and you're not getting your needs met because you don't have relationships with other people, you don't feel like you're being productive, you are in a constant state of escape. You don't feel like there's any meaning to your life, there's any purpose, you don't feel like you have any fulfillment or any reason why you're on this planet. You're looking for a solution. And instead of looking for solutions that I think they should be looking towards, which is relationships, security, looking at their own traumas, healing from those traumas, talking about their emotions, figuring out, all the things I talk about. instead, because they've been indoctrinated into this mindset, they feed into, and there are plenty of people online that will feed them this information, where stoicism and denial of the self and willpower is the solution to that. So that's mindfulness. Mindfulness is great, but if people are using it as a solution to this, as the only solution to this, it's not going to work because we need humans. We need meaning. We need purpose. And a purpose and meaning in life is something that emerges from within you, but it can only emerge from within us when we feel like there's a lot of things that need to be in place for. And one of the ways that this manifested was when I decided to become a therapist. I was 24, which is, in my view now, very, very young. And I was starting my career in market research because I didn't really know what else to do. I had received a bachelor's degree in business because I didn't know what degree to get because I was kind of aimless. And I was in a career that was going well, and I could see my future, and it looked good to me. And I felt like I liked market research. I liked where I was headed, and it was fun and interesting, and I could see myself making enough money to, afford maybe a used car in the future, because at the time I was still driving my dad's car. But anyway. But I felt this acute sense of it doesn't feel like it's in line with my purpose, and I don't know what my purpose is. So I'm sitting in traffic and I start thinking about other occupations. I eventually land on therapist, and it all comes into focus, and I'm like, yes. And I had never considered being a therapist before. I had been to therapy a bit a few years prior, so that's maybe why it popped in my head. But I instantly was like, yes, that feels like I will be able to enact my purpose, the meaning of my life. And I was right about it. I think I was kind of randomly right that I could predict that, because I didn't really have a good sense of what the career being in psychology meant, but I had enough, and I acted on it. And within a week, I was applying to graduate school, and within a few months, or even just a month or two, I was taking prereqs. And within 6 or 7 months, I was in graduate school. And within a year and a half or 2 years, I was practicing as a therapist, as an intern. So, but I'll hear from a lot of other people that they won't hit that point until they're 35 or 45. Some people never hit that point where, one, they even ask themselves what the purpose of their life is. And by purpose of life, it can be a lot of different things. It could literally be, the purpose of my life is to take care of my kids, or the purpose of my life is to be happy, or the purpose of my life is my marriage, or the environment, or a political movement, or my art. There's a lot of different things. Or to build a happy life for me and my family, by having a good work-life balance. That could be the purpose of your life. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be something fancy, but it doesn't have to be. But the point is that there are two things that have to be present. One, we have to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of my life? We have to, one, know to ask that, and two, feel safe enough to ask it. And two, we have to have an answer eventually. It takes some time to figure that out, but we have to ask ourselves. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves that question: what is the purpose? What sort of life is in the zone for me to actually feel like I'm not wasting my time? That will justify all the bullshit that I have to go through, right? Because if you're just dealing with the bullshit and you're not living your life's purpose, then all you have is bullshit. When you're living your life's purpose and you have bullshit, then you're like, well, but I'm doing it for a reason. That's what gets us up in the morning. So we have to ask the question, and we have to be safe enough to ask the question and also be able to answer the question. A big part of answering the question has to do with us being in touch with our feelings. So for me, growing up, my parents were attuned enough for me and non-traumatizing to me such that every step of the way, age appropriately, I became more and more in touch with my feelings and my needs and my emotions and my thoughts and my value and what I could offer the world. So by the time I was in my 20s, I could actually enact and think and figure out what the rest of my life should look like. So when you have people who have never been given that, they weren't given enough attunement growing up, they might have been traumatized as well, they're 25, 30, 35 years old, and they've just been drifting, right? And especially if they've been invisibilizing and avoiding and smoking pot and, getting out of relationships or bothering other people sufficiently so they just run away from them. They might have a job that's good enough. They run home, they play video games, they escape and masturbate and drink and smoke. And to go to stoicism is, it's sort of like, okay, I need to punish myself for having any sort of pleasure in my life. And then there's all the pseudoscience around that. There's some good science in the rhetoric, but there's a lot of pseudoscience around it that's like you're addicted to dopamine and all this kind of stuff. And it doesn't actually make any sense scientifically regarding human psychology. It equates pleasure with addiction the way that we equate the pleasure of cocaine or cigarettes or alcohol with I've already talked at length about these kinds of things, and it just plays into patriarchal ideas of like you have to beat yourself up and you have to be stoic and above it all. Whereas when I work with these people, it's a matter of me through like thousands of different ways, me helping them to have the safety and know to explore occasionally who they are, what do they want, how do they feel? Who are you? What do you want? How do you feel? And maybe specifically though, what do you want? How do you feel? What do you want? How do you feel? Some of you might need this, and I've talked about sense of self or connection with self. What do you want? How do you feel? If you can't answer that question very quickly, then you weren't given enough safety and time to explore and to develop those neurons that will be able to investigate that. When I ask myself, how do I feel and what do I need? It's literally a neuronal experience where there's memory involved and prefrontal cortex and indications in my body that are sub-perceptual of how do I feel? What do I want? What's my energy level? Do I like, I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking, there's a lot of things that come into my brain at once. And if I wasn't given age appropriate time to develop at each step of the way, at the age of 2, at the age of 7, at the age of 13, there are important steps along the way that we develop. What do I want and how do I feel? What do I want and how do I feel? What do I want? How do I feel? So that's what I do with these people. And then once they get in connection with that, just on the micro, they can begin to ask the macro questions like, what's the meaning of my life? Because if they have a meaning of their life and they're in connection with their needs, they won't want to sit at home and play video games and smoke weed and masturbate all day. And they certainly don't want to be stoic and meditate all day. They want to do things. I don't know what those things are, but and maybe video games and masturbating and smoking weed is a part of that, right? But it's not the only thing, And so for these individuals, when they are demoralized and they're just like, what's wrong with my life? What's wrong with me? I wish that they would go to a therapist that understood how to diagnose what is the problem. Now, connection with the self isn't necessarily always the problem. It can be a lot of things. Like another thing I've ran into is ADHD sufferers will be undiagnosed or even diagnosed. And when they were children, they were, because of their neurodifference, they were constantly being yelled at and chastised and punished because of these individuals dropping the ball on a lot of things. And, they don't finish a chore, or they don't bring their homework to school, or they forget to pick up something at the store and they promise their mom that they would. There's just all these things that will happen. And to the individual with ADHD, especially if they're not diagnosed, they end up believing I'm a screw up. There's something wrong with me. And they will again, because especially if a lot of the punishments and the criticism is scary to, occasionally scary to the child, then, which it, often is, teachers, parents, this kind of thing. Then, because, even if the parents are good parents, this can happen because you can have a kid with ADHD. So, say moderate to severe, say moderate, and the kid has been flunking their classes. Say the kid's 13, when failing your classes actually starts to matter, because in high school, at least in the States, if you don't pass your classes, you have to take them over again, or else you won't graduate, with your diploma. And so you, as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, you are continually forgetting to do your homework, and even if you do, you forget to bring it to school, or you forget to even note the assignment from the teacher themselves, and you already think of yourself as kind of lazy, and you're just trying to avoid things, and you're used to just sort of skating by, and you are halfway through the first school year of high school, and your parents are getting these slips from school saying he's failing literally every class except for PE or whatever. And the parents are trying to talk, and the parents are good parents, and they don't know the kid has ADHD. But even if they knew the kid had ADHD, sometimes it can be a problem. Anyway, let's say the parents don't know. They're talking to the kid, and they're like, "Hey, here's a system, here's a calendar. Make sure, maybe even texting the kid, make sure you write down the assignment for math." And the kid, it tries, gets the text, and oh yeah, that's right, and looks around, and then there's some kind of interrupt. They get distracted, and they forget to do it, or they do manage to write it down, and then they forget to put that piece of paper in their bag and bring it home. Or they lose the piece of paper. Or they do get the paper home, but they forget to do the homework. Or they do remember to do their homework, but they look at their notation and they don't even know what the notation means because they forgot, because working memory. Memory is a huge problem for people with ADHD. Or they do manage to do their homework, but they leave it on their desk, and then they go to school and they don't put it in their bag. There's just so many things that can happen along the way. And I know all this because I worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of families that had some version of this issue, not necessarily ADHD, but what I would marvel at, because it was kind of different. It was different for me because I don't have ADHD, and I was able, I'm pretty organized, and even as a chaotic teenager, I was able to kind of keep a lot of this stuff straight. So I don't have that neuro difference, and I'd never noticed how many steps along the way there is for a child to succeed on just one assignment, let alone 7 assignments that are assigned that day, and that isn't even talking about large projects, right? Anyway, so the parents are trying, and then after 6 months, again, they don't know the kid has ADHD, and the kid is still failing, and there's multiple marks on their records, like he didn't turn it in, he forgot to study for the test. The parents come, they're just like, what is, and the kid's playing Nintendo, and it's just like, trying to enjoy himself. And the parents, they're freaking out now because they get their 50th slip, and they, after talking with the kids, and the parents are just worried as crap. They don't know what to do, and they're frustrated, and they come barging into the bedroom, and they're just like, what is going on? We told you to turn, how come this happened? And they might not be abusive, but they're emphasizing. And to the kid, depending, it might just be like, and it just comes out of nowhere to them because, again, because of their neurodifference, not only does it interfere with this whole process, but it interferes with them tracking that they're not even doing it, So, and for not for everyone with ADHD, but so there, even good parents can cause that, oh shit, what happened? What did I do? What happened? Or the kid walks into the classroom and everyone starts laughing, and the teacher's just like, what are you doing here? And you're like, what happened? And the teacher's like, didn't you know? We told you, and because the kid didn't remember or forgot or didn't pay attention, there's a lot of experiences like that where even when no one is being abusive, the kid will just have all these like shocking moments, like, holy shit, what's happening? Oh God, what did I do? What? And that's fear, that's terror, right? And that can really lock in and cause, the smoking and the video gaming and the invisibilizing and the avoiding and just, and then I'm demoralized. I don't know who I am. What am I? I'm a loser. I need to become an anime character and rise above it and be alpha male and, screw women and feminism. And I'm going to be stoic and strong and I'm going to work out and, I'm going to deny my brain dopamine and oxytocin. And, it's a whole world. So, and this is my very unrefined ramble. How long have I been talking about this? Is any of this interesting to you? Okay, I promise. No more rambling. No more rambling, Kirk. Just watch and react, in short bits.
And then you feel better.
And then for a little bit, I would feel better. But it was just this emptiness.
Yeah.
And it was just a cycle of things that I could use to distract myself.
Yeah.
And I think I was fortunate to get to the other side of it and recognize it for what it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's saying he's gotten to the other side of it and recognizing for what it is, and it does sound like he does recognize, he does have self-awareness. I think Roxanne, if she were here, she would say, well, you still have a problem because you're still avoidant and playing video games all day and don't seem, I was wondering about that with Roxanne because, her initial statements is, I want someone who has ambition. That's what she is seeing, right? She sees, the way that it could be happening, and I think I hypothesized this earlier, that there's something going on that feels bad to her in the relationship and she can't put her finger on it. So she just grasps for something that is within her perceptual, repertoire, which is ambition and business and, being a go-getter and making money and this sort of thing. And she's like, well, that must be it. He's not doing that. That must be why this feels bad. Instead of actually what is the real problem is distance and rejection and a lack of vitality in the relationship, a lack of eye contact, a lack of a back and forth, right? Where one person or both people are like putting effort into the other person, right? Because you could imagine, given the way he's presenting and the way he talks, that that wasn't present. And so I wonder about that. But I wonder, given the way that he's talking, given the way that Roxanne is talking, that he's gotten better, but he still has a long way to go. All right, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.